Ben, first of all, could you maybe tell us about your introduction to the art of hosting, or how did you end up in this world of the art of hosting?
Well, you got it right on the nose with Michael Jones. Special greeting to Aurelia there, home of Michael Jones. Um, I chanced into a gathering that was called the Wasson Dialogues on the Soul of Place that was hosted by Michael Jones. And it's one of those gatherings that had a name that was so mysterious and intriguing. When we went to that, Peter and I, we didn't have the faintest idea what was going to happen, but it sure sounded good. And what we ended up in was an immersive 4-day process on an island in Muskoka, in which rather than anyone teaching us the art of hosting, we were immersed in the best change processes I have ever experienced. And we came out of that with our heads spinning and wanting to bring some of it to our home community. We didn't quite know how. For me, I'll step back and say, I had spent a good part of my adult and working life pushing away traditional forms of leadership because the processes didn't feel sufficiently alive and they didn't feel sufficiently collaborative. And here was process work that brought out truly shared leadership, deep participation, and a sense of aliveness was the guiding force at every stage of it. So there's a start.
Great. Thanks, Ben. So can you tell us a bit? I know you have some great stories to share with us, and they're both some of your broader community work with Peterborough pollinators. But I wonder if you might give us a sense of how the art of hosting has affected your own congregation with the Unitarian Fellowship in Peterborough. Could you tell us a bit about that?
Sure. Yeah. So I'm part of a mid-sized Unitarian congregation here. We're about 110 members, and we've been working in art of hosting processes in the congregation as a gradual form of culture change for about 2 years at this point. We got interested in that because there were a number of people in that community that became part of the Peterborough Dialogues process, were sparked by a different way of relating to each other and gathering. And a small group participated in a 1.5-day training to form a core team to do what we called our community conversations process. Over those 2 years, we've held about 10 gatherings, but we've also, what I feel has been happening now is we're experiencing a culture shift in which some of the key messages that I will get to, I promise, in what I'm going to say, the guiding principles are starting to infuse our whole congregation. Committees are meeting differently. Our annual meeting, I'll give you my first little concrete example. The chair of the board came up with a process where instead of traditional report backs from committees and groups, we have a table talk process where there are several tables that represent each of those groups, and you can go to the one that calls you with curiosity or a question and basically spend that time doing exactly what you want to do out of the options that are available in a participatory way. We held roughly our 10th gathering this past weekend, and it was called, if you'd asked me for my word, I was going to use the word balance, which is our congregational theme for the month, but it's also, I was going to cheat and expand it into a phrase. The title of that event was Balancing Life, Leadership, and Joy. And that's what we're trying to do with these processes. Balance life, leadership, and joy in the congregation. We were exploring our culture of leadership at a time of transition that you will all probably recognize, where the role and nature of religious communities is changing, and traditional structures don't seem to be what appeals to people as much as they used to. Belonging to a committee or being on a board, people are looking for different forms and structures and ways of gathering that draw more people in and are more energizing. And we ended up spending the last section of that workshop on Sunday, workshopping 4 different ideas that were spontaneously generated through the conversation that we had.
Wow, wow, wow. And tell us the piece about the children's church, the Sunday school program.
That's a good example. So that's a gathering that we had about a year ago. And, you know, very often people start dealing with something in their congregation as a problem. The problem in that situation was one you probably recognize in various forms. We need more volunteers for our kids program on Sunday morning. How do we do that? Well, we decided not to ask that question. Instead, we put out a possibility-oriented aspirational invitation that was focused on the question, what are the key experiences that we want kids to have in their time as a whole, as part of this congregation, and what are the most important experiences you had as a kid that stick with you now? So we treated that as a guiding question for an art of hosting process, which balanced small group work in which people got to tell their own individual stories and reconnect on an emotional level with those personal experiences. And that led into solo journaling time, into how that guided people in their dreams for the congregation as a whole. And then a participatory process that was not about proposing specific programs, the nitty-gritty of that, but more recognizing the surprising themes that were outside what we would have talked about. So in that particular case, they included, we want to be outside more. We want to mix the generations more. Time in nature, breaking the bounds of Sunday morning. It was not what we would have talked about if it had been, how can we recruit more volunteers for our program?
Wow, wow. I love, so you reframed it. I wrote this down, a possibility-oriented aspirational invitation.
Absolutely. You got it. In the form of, a key thing there is in the form of a question. In the form of a question, not a project, not a problem, but a question, a heart-centered question. What if we could imagine, picture, how can we?
Wow. Wow. So it started with people's hearts and their own experience and their stories, and let the motivation flow from there. That's a beautiful story. Do you want to, now I know you've prepared some
Al,
for us.
Yeah. Just a question from Carolyn Smith asking, what was the context, back to Ben, what was the context in which you asked the questions of the Sunday school program memories? How did you gather those people to discuss that?
Okay, good question. So we have had a history of various forms of leadership process, including experimenting with process work for a couple more years than the 2 that we've been doing specifically art of hosting processes. We had a year of what our minister called big circle conversations, which were in this direction on themes like money and purpose. And they were a play in the direction of these processes, but the actual context was we formed this task group called the Community Conversations team, and we started holding dialogues in which the whole congregation was invited. Our kids program one was roughly the 3rd of those. It was a 3-hour session held on a Saturday afternoon. And one of the things that I want to stress is, and this relates strongly to what Chris Corrigan had to say last week, is how key the process of invitation is. We spent a good chunk of time over 2 meetings coming up with the wording of the invitation question and the language that connected with us, and we felt would connect with a broad circle of people. And we gathered, in that case, about 30 out of a congregation of 110, which was not bad at all, and a mix of ages from youth to elders. So the invitation went out in a way that was not only for families with kids in the program. In fact, the families with kids in the program were among the busiest, and quite a few of them couldn't come because they have kids, you know. So it was in the context of a larger thrust, but you absolutely can do a one-off session.
Okay, thank you for that question, Carolyn. Yep. I wonder if everyone has found the chat box dialogue stream that's on the right hand. If you go to your the bottom of your menu, and you'll see chat, and you can hit that. And yeah, that's a great way to pose a question for Ben. So Ben, yeah, I was inviting you to, if now is a good time, if you wanted to share some of the slides you'd prepared.
Yeah, you are the first people to see these slides, and this is, I think it's going to become part of a longer presentation, but let's see how this works. So I will, okay. So what I'm doing here is I'm going to give you an example from outside the church context, because it's an example that is light and playful. It's got a 2.5-year history. This is a community project called the Peterborough Pollinators. And I love it as an example, partly because of how it began. So how do you normally picture a community initiative beginning? Usually you think in terms of a bunch of structure, you start by forming a committee. Often somebody is in a leadership role and they start by declaring, we should do this, and they try to convince other people to join in. That is not how this project got started. This project came out of the Peterborough Dialogues, which was a very wide scope art of hosting, community-wide process about local resilience and thriving. And we went through a couple of stages of trying to figure out what we would do next after having big rounds of dialogue that had energized and connected a bunch of people. And we had a number of failed experiments in how to do that. One round of that was we broke it into circles on themes that had emerged from the earlier part of the work. We had a local food circle that met over a period of maybe 10 weeks. And guess what? Not much happened. That's one of the elements I really want to stress in this is there's some fumbling around. Chris Corrigan last time used the words safe to fail experiments. So we hit a point where our local food circle was continuing to meet, but there were only 3 of us who showed up one day. And we all had a sense of dissipating energy, but one of the 3 on that day showed up absolutely fired up by a project they had just heard about in Seattle called the Pollinator Pathway. It is a 1-mile-long strip of pollinator habitat in the middle of the city. And the other 2 of us there caught the bug, but we also caught the bug of that particular project was highly engineered. There is a nonprofit organization and foundation connected with it. They had a list of corporate partners. They had a certification process and had trademarked the name. There was a lot of infrastructure involved in maintaining that project. And our inspiration, the moment of birth of the Peterborough Pollinators, was connecting that example with the idea of using the content of that project as the method as well. That we could do a grassroots up, minimal structure version of Peterborough Pollinators in which we connected and created pollinator habitat around the community as a kind of 1,000 points of light, mostly through finding people who were already doing things that, that were related to this and didn't know quite how to take the next step and were not connected with each other. So what's your model of change? My favorite model of change, many of you will probably be familiar with this, is the Berkana Institute's 2 loops model. And on the left side there, you know, the typical process here is that's for some stage, everything's okay. You recognize there's a problem, and then you go into panic mode. What do we do? We could have expressed all of this in terms of a list, a litany of problems: bee colony collapse, habitat destruction, environmental fear and disaster. We chose not to do that. We chose to focus on the possibilities and the positives in that. And I've got, in this slide here, you see on the right-hand side, the 2 loops of the Berkana Institute's model of change. The light blue loop is there's some work out there that's giving hospice to the old, supporting the old system, maintaining existing structures. The key part here is supporting the emergence of the new, and illuminating the choice between these systems. So we were birthing something very new, and we chose to do that in a very small, limited, experimental way. And a key thing I'll get to in a moment again is you'll notice that the supporting the emergence of the new, the beginning of that loop is not, it's not coming out of the energy of the old system. It's generally coming out of something new and different. I have to be careful not to take too much time here. You can tell this is the first time through this presentation. I love Chris Corrigan's chaotic stepping stones model. I use it all the time now, and there's a heck of a lot on this slide. And what I want to focus on is just the broad categories and the order of operations of things here. We started with a need, a whole lot of problems and issues that this project could address. But our purpose, our animating purpose, was creating habitat and also creating a living laboratory for emergent co-creative community process. Around that, we built a set of principles for how we would work together, and we used those to draw in a core team of people. There is so much of the foundation, the lasting foundation, and the guidance that you need when things are struggling or it's hard to find the next step, that depends on these, being clear about your need, your guiding purpose, and the principles under which you're going to work together. And we had created much of that with the 3 people who happened to show up in a 2-week period, and we were just fired up and ready to go. And we moved from that into creating next steps. But what we did not do, and it took a long time for us to move to, was to create too much form and structure. We didn't worry about, we did not create positions of authority. It took us a couple of months to come up with our name. You know, an example I gave in conversation with somebody this weekend, we didn't need a treasurer for a year. We had our small amount of funds in a paper bag under someone's bed until it was necessary to worry about structure. What we worried about was purpose and relationship in our time together. I'm going to skip over this one. I could spend too much time here. This is Chris Corrigan's 2 loops model, but I'm going to just point to a couple of things. Under the old loop, the one that's curving downward into old structures not being adequate anymore, you've got fail-safe planning. And under the new and emergent structure, you've got safe-to-fail prototyping. And the purpose of that is to experiment in a lot of ways until you've discovered what it is that has enough energy to become a full-scale project. And only at that point can you make a transition that allows you to transfer some of the energy from the old system into the new project. So when the future is uncertain, how do we begin? Where do you start in changing a complex system? The Berkana principle is start anywhere, proceed everywhere. Start small. Start with the process of invitation and the guiding question. And the way that you gather is a key part of how that works. If you gather in old ways, you're going to do old things. And such a simple principle that I felt over and over again. There you go. There's a glitch in my presentation. Follow the energy. There you go. You saw that too briefly. Follow the energy. Use your spidey senses to tell in any session you're having, is the energy rising or is it falling at this moment? If it's falling, do something different. If you're into the stage of declaring what it is you're actually going to do, you can feel where the energy is leading you. Many of you will have used a process called open space. I'm not going to get into talking much about open space except for 2 of its guiding principles. So one is called the law of 2 feet. The law of 2 feet says, if you're not contributing or learning where you are right now, go somewhere else. You're free to do what actually appeals to you in this project. And that, believe it or not, can also apply to you in a position of traditional leadership. If you're not feeling the energy in what it is you're doing, there may be ways that you can do it differently. So that begins with a, well, sorry for my issues with my slides here. We'll work on that for next time. A possibilities orientation is transformative compared to a problems or a work orientation. And those possibilities really come alive when they connect to the personal passion of each person in the room, in the group, and how that connects to shared purpose. So I'm going to get shortly to a very brief introduction to a way of holding meetings differently that makes that a natural thing to have happen.
So Ben, what I'm hearing here is a real practice of resisting the temptation, or my temptation would be come up with a plan and, you know, set up an agenda and, you know, strike committees and everyone gets busy pursuing that plan. So I hear a real sense of spending time, that valuable time, inviting people to go to that heart place, that passion place, that purpose place.
Yes, absolutely. So I'll give you a thank you for that. And a concrete example of a simple way to do that we end up doing at most of these community gatherings is to start, before much else happens except welcome and housekeeping, with putting people in groups of 3. Triads. It is a magical number for allowing people to share their own story in a way that feels safe and also feels like you don't want to, and you really shouldn't, opt out of. And the question usually is as simple as, why was it important to you to be here today? And what that allows is it allows each person in the room to tell their own story of what they imagined that drew them into the room before any of that is limited or diminished by the organizer's purpose. And to do that in a storytelling format, it's done in a listening circle in which each person has a set amount of time, and you don't ask questions at that stage. It is not a conversation. Each person gets a piece of time to tell their story. And I have watched repeatedly in multiple projects, sometimes the bond that happens in those opening triads create friendships and carry deep relationship through over time. I actually remember sitting with you, Alan, in one of the first circles of the Peterborough Dialogues, and your first words in that question were, "I'm a poet." So that was brave and powerful, and I didn't expect it. It changed my expectations of what was going to happen in that gathering. The ritual way that you began here today is another important example. It's not a business meeting. My slides aren't working quite the way I wanted them to, but I'll make sure you can at least hear these points. So constant invitation. So the other piece of the open space process is that whoever comes is the right people. So guiding principles for every one of these gatherings include, we are not going to spend our time talking about what other people or structures that are not in this room should do. We're going to talk about what we who are here today feel called to do next. Another big one, and boy, it's enough to change everything in itself, is we are not going to spend our precious time together on blaming and complaining. That's not allowed. That's if people start doing that, point it out and shut it down. It is amazing how much time you can spend analyzing what's wrong with things and whose fault it is. And as one of my guideposts for all of this, Peter Block says, that may be interesting and it may even be true, and it's not powerful. If you're talking about what people who are not there should do, you're actually giving away your power. So the key thing is, what are we, those of us in this room, going to do together next to animate the possibilities that drew us here in that guiding question? And the way is this hierarchical way that Chris also mentioned last time, of moving, starting with probes and moving to pilots and projects. Probes, what makes them probes is they're safe to fail. And there's one of the unexpected delights for me as someone who's been doing community work for my whole adult life is that there is a lightness about organizing in this way. There's a spirit of play about the invitation that actually lightens the sense of work and responsibility on the organizers, because you make fewer promises of what the outcomes are going to be, and you are explicitly inviting people to bring their own stories into the room. Chris has a blog post title that I really like that says, "You're not failing as well as you think you are." And his advice on how to decide what to try is, if all of it succeeds, you weren't brave enough. You want to see a significant number of failures, and an effect of that is you're trying to do multiple things at once. I'm going to pause and see if you want to interrupt me there, and I've got another little piece about how to hold a meeting.
Right. Does anyone else at this point have a question for Ben? Is there something that's he's covering a lot of territory here in a short time? It's really helpful to have these slides, Ben. So would anyone else like to jump in with a question?
Ben, it's not a question, it's a comment. Whoever comes is the right people, and now's the time. We experienced that in a second visioning session when we were getting ready to amalgamate, and only half of the people showed up for the second session. And we ended up using a World Cafe process. And the creativity and play came out with markers all over the paper on our tables, and it went places that we didn't imagine. So it really does work. What you're saying speaks to me.
It's a wonderful comment, and I was a skeptic on that one, and then I've seen it happen over and over again in projects in the last 3 years. I'm going to give you one more example. When there was a contract I was involved in that was for a United Church Music Festival, and there was a series of pre-festival phone calls in which those coming to the festival were invited to ask questions of performers. And some of the promotion for the calls just didn't really happen the way it was meant to. And there was a call in which there was a guest performer and one person was on the call. And my heart would have sunk a few years ago. I would have thought, oh my God, what a disaster. I hope no one finds out about this. And instead, the hosting team for that call engaged that one person in a conversation with that one performer that was a transformative experience for that person. And then it was mixed in with some storytelling. The story of that call got shared. And it was a powerful, powerful thing in the process of the work. The pollinators would never have been born if we weren't down to 3 people in a group that was about something else.
Ben, Elizabeth Cunningham in our chat has asked, can you give an example of a safe to fail experiment?
Absolutely. Let's see.
I got lots of them.
Failed experiments too, make a list of those. Safe to fail experiment. So, okay, let's, the pollinators over its 2.5 years have held 4 community summits, and each one of them has had a portion that's called a design lab in which people propose things to try. At our first one, we had people toss out as ideas, creating a 10 steps to build your own pollinator garden guide. It never happened. It never happened. But the reasons for that being proposed stayed in the room and in the conversation. And instead, we ended up with a series of 3 hands-on workshops where people could come and over 3 weeks actually build a garden. And it was in somebody's yard. So somebody got a garden and some community out of it. In that context, we did not announce to the broader community, come and be trained in how to build a pollinator garden with our team of experts. We gathered as a community to learn ourselves and pilot the process, and those who wanted to come came. So there was nothing at risk. It was okay for us to learn from that process. We learned some really valuable things. There were things that needed to be organized in traditional ways for that to work. We needed to have the right materials in the right place on the right day to build that garden. We needed people who had certain kinds of traditional expertise, like what are the pollinator species that belong together and attract different kinds of pollinators over different seasons in our specific location. And we also didn't need to have a work plan for the way that we actually put stuff together. It turned out to be wasted time to try to scope out in stages. Every bit of that learning in those small projects without any pre-announced outcomes guided us in larger projects later on.
Yeah. Ben, could you comment on, because this is an open process and you're learning as you go, could you comment about, how it keeps it accessible for people to show up who haven't been there from the beginning, but might, hear about it and drop in, and like, could you say, and then the opportunity to play a role or not, or come and go?
That's a great question. And it's, for me, is one of the fundamentals of the pollinators, which was my first and most successful living laboratory for how that happens. I'm not sure we would even have known how to ask that question when we started doing this. And we more or less stumbled on a way of holding weekly meetings that has that effect. And it just happens to be this slide that's partly revealed right now. So I hope this slide works. Let's find out. There we go. Okay, so what I'm talking about now is what might be a committee meeting, not a large hosted event. That's a different thing, how to structure that. But we meet without an agenda, which might sound terrifying. And there are 5 steps in the way that we meet. The first is a check-in, and at the beginning of a process, it's usually the question is, why was it important to you to be here today? Later on in the process, it might be, what intention did you bring with you to today's meeting? Or what got you in the room today specifically? It is a timed, short go-round that brings people's immediate energy in a way that it's connected with the purpose. Sometimes a very rich and deep and even very long piece is what are your latest ahas and insights? So since the last time we gathered, what is alive for you right now that you've just learned or discovered? It might be related to an item that would be on a traditional agenda. It's usually not. It's usually background and deeper than that. And what's special about it is it's fresh and alive. I'm going to give a concrete example of one of my favorite ever gatherings of the Peterborough pollinators, where we have a participant who is a master's student in biology and was in the throes of finishing her thesis. And we knew her as a scientist, and she started talking about the fact that in writing her thesis, she'd spent 2 years watching one plant. And she just became poetic and magical about moving from how on earth could she do that to the incredible magic of that. We spent 5 times as much time at that meeting listening to that than we did in deciding what to do. But when it came time to decide what to do, boy, were we all energized and ready to take things on. There's a beautiful quotation from Einstein that's a different take on that, which is if I were faced with a problem that the fate of the world depends on, I would want to spend 90% of the time understanding and exploring the question. So latest ahas and insights, it brings fresh energy into every meeting, and it is open to everyone who's there, regardless of whether or not they have ever had a role in the project before. The traditional agenda part, the question is, what's alive in your work? And I've done this, I don't have time to go into that in as much detail as I would like to. It's the meat of the gathering, and it's where, if there are projects happening, the intent of asking the question that way is, it's not a checklist of, is this done, is that done? Not everybody needs to know about every part of that, and it could be done in other ways. So the what's alive in your work invites, what are you struggling with? What do you need help with? What have you just learned that makes something better? And it leads in an indirect and unexpected way to actually getting a whole bunch of stuff done. Oops. I'm trying to make the next slide come, and it doesn't seem to want to. Okay, I'm not sure. My slides have stopped rotating, and I don't know why, but I'll tell you that's the meat of the meeting, and the last two stages are essentially an exit. Number 4 is, what's next for you? And you'll notice the word you in that. It's not what's next for us. We've all made commitments at this point, but what's next for you, we check in and we check out as individuals, and the shared purpose part of the meeting is in the middle. So we are recognizing that we are allowed and our energy is highest when we are choosing which parts of this to take on ourselves. And that's an opportunity to say, for example, boy, this is good what we did today. I'm going to take that to this other group that I'm part of. Or, you know, I feel inspired to go spend more time in nature this week, or something that simple. And the last, number 5, which I will share this so that you can actually read it, is what are you leaving with? What are you leaving with is a one word or phrase, go around in the circle. And I love that way of exiting, because I've seen over and over again that in a meeting that got, a gathering that got a little muddy and complicated, that it can end with a go round of inspired and energizing words that fire everyone up as the gathering closes. A lot of the work of projects gets done outside of these gatherings by people who've been energized. We spent our time together on purpose and relationship. And then we go off and do stuff.
Yeah. Wow. Wow. That's awesome. Ben, you did it, and you're right on time for our breakout sessions. So wow. Oh, and there's the 5. Thank you very much.
Good. Yeah. Okay.
We're going to break now into triads, into groups of 3. And our question for you, I know it's written down in the Google Doc. Joe, do you have it there in front of you? I'm trying to pull up my document. I keep getting my order of service for Sunday instead.
Okay, yeah, it is here. It's in the group Google Docs. You can use the index at the top to jump down to the breakout groups section. And the question is, what declaration of possibility you can make about, can you make, I think I should say, about bringing a new culture of relationship, new culture of leadership into your context? What would you like to try? And you can use these words to begin. I believe we can. So Ben, before we jump, just the launching point into this, we'll have Ben say just a couple more words about this declaration of possibility. But so in your breakout groups, you'll talk about what declaration of possibility could you make about bringing a new culture of leadership into your context? What would you like to try in order for that to happen? And so you could, in your groups, you could start with the phrase, I believe we can, and then make your declaration of possibility. I believe we can something. And then as you meet in your small groups, breakout groups, use these sections in the Google Doc. Just pick one. It doesn't matter what group number you are. Just grab a group number and type in who is in your group and just some of the harvest from that conversation. What are some of the insights, the ahas, the emergent wisdom of that conversation as you meet in your 3-person triad group? Ben, I'm going to let you say, if we have some people dropping out at this point, other things that are calling them, I guess. And so while Ben does that, I will just rejuggle the groups here a little bit so that we've got about 3 people in each group.
Okay, and what I want to say about that is that question is not just a question for right now, but it's also a stage in how to hold a gathering of the kind I described from last weekend. In fact, we used that question last weekend right in the middle. After people had connected and been energized by a question and some dialogue, it comes straight out of this book, which, if I can recommend one source to you, and Chris also mentioned it last week, it would be this book, which is called Community, the Structure of Belonging, by Peter Block, who is a community organizer in Cincinnati, very much in a church context as well in parts of his work. And the first half of this book tells you why to work this way, and the second half tells you how to work this way. And his phrasing of the question is, what declaration of possibility can you make that has the power to inspire, to transform your community and inspire you? And those are both important. And in a ritual way, on Saturday in the middle of our Culture of Leadership gathering, we had solo journaling time for a few minutes that ended with people each writing a declaration of possibility in colorful Crayola marker on an 8.5 by 11 index card. And then we stood in a circle around a chalice in the room, and we each read them out and laid them down, and they were there as a touchstone for the rest of the process.
Thank you. That's great. So we've got about 12 minutes left. You'll in your small group, you'll have 12 minutes. You'll get a 1 minute or 2 minute warning? A 1 minute warning. So without further ado, Joe, can you do your magic?
I can. You'll see a window pop up on your screen. Just click and you'll be placed into a small group with 2 other people. Here we go.
Hi, everybody. We're back.
And we're back.
Hello.
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 Welcome back, everyone. What we'd like to invite you to do is to use the Google Doc just for a few minutes. We thought we'd give you 5 minutes, 5 whole minutes to do a bit of journaling, to write what's you're taking away from this today. What are your takeaways? What are your learnings? What are the adventures you want to go on? Joe, do you want to add anything?
Just to say that I noticed that only a few took some notes of the harvest from their triad conversations. It's hard to type stuff in and talk at the same time. This Google Doc will be available to you indefinitely. So if anybody wants to put some notes in, even after we're done the call, you're welcome to do that, as well as the notes that Alan has just referred to.
you can find there is a section for this in the Google Doc for your reflections.
There are bookmarks at the top of the screen that jump to the different sections if you want to use that.
Right. Not to be confused with the last evaluation session, which we'd also like you to add your comments. This next 5 minutes is for you, for what you're learning, what your takeaways are.
Yeah, it's called the wrap-up section.
Okay. We're looking forward to hosting this conversation a month from now, Wednesday, April 25th, with Peter Pula, who will be talking about the value of inviting strangers into your process. So that would be a month from now. Change comes from strangers is how Peter Block puts it in that book, Community, that Ben was sharing from us. Change comes from strangers. So I'd like to just close in these last 5 minutes by inviting each of you to share just a couple words about what it is you're taking away from this time together. Just a word or two. And I guess the way I'll do that is to invite you as you appear on my screen. Stacy, could you unmute yourself? And
oh, I'm last in, first out. I'm an old accountant, so I'm used to valuing inventory. So I was last in and first out today. LIFO. I'm just looking forward to a new energy in leading conversation with the wider community, especially as I was speaking about the home that we're looking at building of seniors affordable housing, and just inviting in people from the wider community and engaging with them in new and interesting ways.
thank you. Carolyn Smith.
Wow, that was fast. The word that's coming to mind is mastery. Finding opportunities to be intentional and practice, and then making it work for people.
Thank you. Nancy?
Sorry, it took me a moment to unmute. I think for me, it's a reminder of the power of questions and curiosity, and how that framing of the invitation takes time to discern it appropriately.
Thank you. Allison and Judith.
Yes. I think we were just commenting that there are several things that took away, but the thing that seems to encompass them all is the thought that, if you do meetings in the same old way, you'll do the same old stuff. And I know in our congregation, we still struggle with that. Even after, quite a period of interim ministry, we still hear the old, but we've always done it that way come up. And, that closes down creativity and open thinking. So.
And what comes to mind is Harrison Owen, who created Open Space. His statement, if you get the relationship right, anything and everything's possible.
Nice. Ken Whiting.
Yes. What I'm really going back to Ontario to face is we've always done it that way mentality. How do you get over that inertia? And what you said there at the end, change comes from strangers. I think we need to start bringing in some outside ideas. And maybe as the outsider coming in, we can start to get over that hump. Like I say, it's an awful inertia. And as was said, you keep doing things the old ways, the old results just keep coming on, and we're seeing the results are diminishing congregations, churches dying.
Thank you.
So we need to find a way to invite new people in.
Yeah. Thank you. Mark.
Hello there. So the 3 quick points: the questions you ask, how you ask them, and creating a space that's in which safe to fail is a welcome person in the room. I think that would be it. And we also have Michelle.
Hello, I'm with Mark on the safe to fail side, because we spend so much time trying to be perfect in everything we do, whether it's through small groups, whether it's through music. Change is happening, and we need to be comfortable to fail and let life continue.
Thank you. Thank you. We're running out of time. Let's keep going. Paul Mullen.
Very good. It helps to, yes, I have to leave right away, but the whole business of the possibility-oriented invitation, aspirational invitation, and the 5-step process, excellent.
Thank you.
All right.
Yeah, Karen Medland.
I think what I'm taking away is this sense of this declaration of the possibility, how to get leadership in the congregation to wrestle with that idea.
Thank you. I see Shannon is saying, my one word would be explore. I have to go. But she's off to explore. Debbie Sherwin.
My takeaway is I am leaving with the courage to try new ways and let go of the expectations.
Thank you. And Elizabeth Cunningham.
Oh, for me, it's going to be to figure out how I can have a council meeting without an agenda. That's my goal.
Okay. Terry Meyer.
Intentional leadership, intentional relationship.
Thank you. And David Leighton Brown.
I have 2 takeaways. The first is that new and different is not necessarily better, but the same old ways are also not necessarily better. And it is fundamentally important to be open to what would be better. The second thing is I'm really struck by the power and energy of shared purpose.
Thank you. And Bob Richard.
I think it's to experiment with the 5-step meeting process. I'm not sure I'm brave enough yet to do a whole council meeting on it. So I'll try it out.
Okay. Experiment. And Nita.
I keep thinking as well about possibilities, and I'm also thinking start small and yeah, try it out in the committee meetings like Terry and I were talking about.
Good. And Elizabeth Brown?
Just excited by the possibilities.
Thank you. Did we get everyone? How about you, Ben? Do you want to say what you're taking away?
Yeah, so first of all, I put a link to, I created a outline of the 5-step process with a few extra little notes in it, and there's a link to that in the chat, which could be shared around. I really appreciated this opportunity, and safe to fail is start small. It may not be the right thing to take to your full council. Maybe there's a smaller group or context. And the feel the energy is great advice for that. If you're feeling afraid to try it, it's not a safe to fail experiment. So try it in a safer and smaller context first. Thanks.
Thank you. Thank you. We'll put that link. I'm putting that link into the Google Docs so we don't lose it. Joe is also saying that the recordings of these will be available after the fourth one. Any last words, Joe?
No, I don't think so. I always get, as even though we organize these, I get a huge amount out of participating in them, and I'm really grateful to Ben for joining us today. Thanks a lot, Ben, for being our guest.
Yeah. Yes, thanks to Ben, and thanks to each one of you for your contributions. So appreciate participating with you in this session. Easter blessings as you move through Good Friday into the good news of Easter. Thanks for being here.
So there is an evaluation, the very last section on the Google Doc. The Google Docs remain available indefinitely, so you can fill that out anytime. And then our practice on these is to everybody to unmute, and I think at this point we'll say blessings, Easter blessings or something like that. How's that, Al?
Sounds good.
Together.
If everyone wants
Everybody unmute themselves, and Easter blessings, everyone.
Easter blessing.
Easter blessing.
Easter blessing.
Peace and more peace. Amen.
Bye now.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye.